everybody. It is Monday, May 6th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Mo Shwanunu. This is the place, of course, where we bring you just the facts. We read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, my partner here, is traveling today, so she will be back tomorrow. For now, it's me solo. I want to wish all the nurses out there a happy National Nurses Day. It's part of National Nurses Week. We're so appreciative, so grateful for all of your hard work. So this week, please give a shout out to a nurse you know, family, friend, colleague, someone who's taking care of you. We are so incredibly thankful for all of them this week and all year long. All right, let's get started with today's headlines. We're exactly 6 months from Election Day today. So with that in mind, we will take a look at the latest polling to give us a sense of where we're at in this race. Long story short, it is a tie right now between Biden and Trump, and we'll tell you what this election may come down to, what's called the double haters. I'll explain. A push on Capitol Hill now to better research menopause, including actress Halle literally yelling menopause at the top of her lungs last week. We'll tell you all about it. Looking abroad, we'll take a look at the negotiations that appear to be falling apart right now between Hamas and Israel, as the Israelis warn that if Hamas does not agree to this ceasefire, they will likely follow through with that invasion of southern Gaza. And it comes as the Israelis have now officially decided to kick the Al Jazeera network out of the country. Closer to home, a tragic turn of events for some surfers in Baja California, what Mexican authorities are telling us. An update from a few college campuses as we continue to watch those protests now in a second or third week, depending on the school, and it comes as some protesters have started to interrupt commencement ceremonies this weekend. Florida becomes the first state to ban lab-grown meat. We'll tell you what's behind it or who's behind it. Tick season is officially upon us, why numbers appear to be growing annually in the U.S. And Madonna makes history down in Brazil, breaks the record for the most concert attendees ever. We'll tell you about her massive show in Rio de Janeiro over the weekend. And I'll end, as always, with On This Day in History. All right, let's start with politics here. Today is May 5th. We're officially 6 months from November 5th, which is Election Day. No matter how you split it, a new ABC News poll over the weekend shows that it is effectively a tie. When it comes to a national survey of all Americans eligible to vote, it's Trump 46, Biden 44, within the margin of error. When you talk to registered voters, it's Biden 46, Trump 45, margin of error. And among likely voters, the people most likely to actually vote and who have voted in previous elections, it's Biden 49, Trump 45, again, within the margin of error. Now add in third-party candidates, say RFK, Cornel West, Jill Stein, some of the candidates we've told you about, somehow make it on the ballot in all 50 states, still effectively a tie between Biden and Trump. So when many of you ask me on Instagram for my prediction, I tell you as much. It is too soon to tell. When asked about the issues, the 10 most significant issues to American voters right now, Trump leads on 6 of those issues, Biden in just 2. They're tied in 2 other categories. Trump leading in the most important categories to voters, economy, inflation, and crime, where he holds between an 8 to 14 point advantage over Joe Biden. Trump also leads on immigration by 17 points, on the Middle East, Israel-Hamas by 8 points, and by 7 points when it comes to overall foreign policy. Where Biden leads right now on the issues, according to the latest poll, abortion by 12 points, and when it comes to healthcare, by 5 points. So those are his only 2 issues where he has a lead. And when it comes to the question of who do you most trust to protect democracy, the 2 men are tied with Republicans and Democrats with different views on what it means to protect democracy. Now, when you look at the numbers, you may ask then, why does Biden still within the margin of error if Trump is dominating when it comes to all these issue areas? Well, it appears based on polling that it continues to be for his personal attributes, that he leads by 16 points when it comes to who's seen as most honest and trustworthy. He leads when it comes to represents my personal values and has a slight lead when it comes to understands the problems of people like you. But at the end of the day, neither man is popular. Biden has a 40% favorability. Trump has a 33% favorability, which leads to the analysis of this election that it's going to come down to who they call double haters. 1 in 5 Americans are now considered double haters, meaning they both dislike Donald Trump and dislike Joe Biden. So this makes 2024 really comparable to 2016. That's when 18% of voters disliked Trump and Clinton. Both men In 2020, Biden and Trump had higher favorables, but back then in 2016, it was seen as an election between two people who had unfavorable ratings. So 2024 now looks to be a repeat of that, the double haters. The question about the double haters is, will they stay home? Will they vote for third party, or will they end up biting the bullet and deciding either for Biden or for Trump? That could be a major factor in a number of swing states. We've told you that it comes down to the Electoral College in a few states, and in some of these states, we're talking about a 10,000 vote difference when it comes to 2 or 3 million voters. Places like Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, etc. So these double haters are going to be huge here. Now, the Biden campaign believes they have an advantage among the double haters, meaning they believe that people hate Trump more than they hate Biden. And they're really aggressively going after Nikki Haley voters who Trump has criticized, hasn't really spent time trying to reach out to. And so as far as the Biden analysis is concerned, the people who are voting for Nikki Haley both dislike Trump and dislike Biden, but dislike Trump more, especially in recent states. Weeks, months now after Nikki Haley has dropped out, there are still people in primaries voting for Nikki Haley. At the same time, Trump believes that he can win over the double haters. He's addressing the Libertarian National Convention later this month. He also has ads targeting disaffected black voters who he believes he can win over. He believes he can convince them that Biden has not done enough for them, especially black men. He thinks that he can tick up among black men and again, win over, at least in that category, the double haters. One thing we were watching over the weekend, Trump held a massive fundraiser down at Mar-a-Lago over the weekend where he's had like an apprentice-like audition for his VP candidates. At the event on Saturday, he had Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, a number of people who have been high up on his vice presidential list. Effectively, he likes to have his donors, his friends interact with these people, give him feedback, sort of like he did on the Apprentice TV show on NBC for a number of years. So they were holding a retreat in Palm Beach at the Four Seasons near Mar-a-Lago there. He actually went one by one in his speech, praising each of those individuals, anyone remotely seen as a VP candidate. We've told you it could be months before he makes his final selection here. He's sort of watching how Republicans feel about these candidates, how independents feel about these candidates. We've told you about the Kristi Noem autobiography fiasco of last week, where she admitted to shooting her dog and her goat. Did not go over well, though he did still praise her at the event over the weekend. He also took aim at Joe Biden. At one point during this event, apparently comparing President Biden to the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police. He believes his various trials that related to January 6th, classified records, mean that Joe Biden is running effectively Nazi secret police again, in the words of former President Trump. Also notable, it's just the latest incendiary thing that Trump has said recently. As he says, the stakes in the election, depending on who you vote for, will result in the success or failure of this country. One other note, they had some pollsters address this conference on Saturday. They believe that in addition to the competitive states, that they can flip Minnesota and Virginia, which have become increasingly blue, increasingly Democratic in recent decades. Republicans, the Trump camp, believing they can actually flip those states 6 months from now. So that's something we'll be watching. All right, meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, we're watching a group of all-female senators who are leading the charge on a new $275 million bill that will boost federal research and physician training on menopause. They're getting some help and some attention from Halle Berry. You might know her, the Hollywood actress. She was on Capitol Hill last week. She says she's been fighting to destigmatize menopause, and she shared at a press conference last week her own doctor's unwillingness to even use the word menopause. Here's Halle Berry on Capitol Hill.
I was at the doctor 3 days ago, and I went in to talk to him about an issue, and I said to him, you know why I'm having this issue, right? And he says, yes, I know. I said, tell me, why am I having this issue? He said, you tell me why you're having the issue. I said, no, you tell me why I'm having the issue. And we went back and forth. You tell me, you tell me, you tell me. I finally realized he wasn't going to say it. So I thought, okay, I have to do what no man can do. I have to say it. I said, I'm in menopause! Okay? And that's why I'm having this issue. And he said, oh my God, I could never say that to you. Look at you, you don't look like you're in menopause. I could never say that. And if I said that to all of my female clients, they'd punch me. And again, I knew That is why I'm here doing this work, because it has to be destigmatized. The shame has to be taken out of menopause.
We posted that clip on Friday on the Instagram feed, got a lot of feedback, attention, shares on the account, so certainly resonating with a number of you. The legislation on Capitol Hill calls for the federal government to spend more on clinical trials on menopause, as well as the hormone therapy that is used to treat hot flashes and other symptoms. Halle Berry has been among those who've been very candid about the painful symptoms she experienced while going through perimenopause, which occurs before menopause when a woman's estrogen levels start dropping. Berry's doctor actually initially misdiagnosed her with herpes, saying that her and her partner had herpes, the STD. They both tested negative. Eventually, the doctor, realizing, as you heard in that clip, that, it's menopause. So the bill here is called the Advancing Menopause Care in Midlife Women's Health Act. And a number of senators are working on it. It's actually backed by 17 senators, 3 Republicans, 13 Democrats, 1 independent, and all 17 of them, women. They say men in leadership have not made this an issue, but they are now prioritizing it, noting that they now have women in top positions. They know the issues, and they will make this a priority. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski saying she was looking forward to getting support from her male counterparts, quote, She added at the press conference, quote, if men went through menopause, we would have adequately and appropriately funded the research into menopause decades and decades ago. But because it's an issue for women, nothing. So this effort is bipartisan, as we noted, female senators on both the Republican and Democratic side. They still need to win over enough male senators here to pass this through, as well as get it through the U.S. House. When you look at the numbers here, patients and healthcare providers have said they are confused about potential treatments. Only 30% of physician residency programs have a formal menopause program. 80% of OBGYN residents say they feel, quote, ill-prepared to discuss menopause with their patients. One of the issues here that they're looking to fund is that there are so few federally funded clinical trials on menopause and menopausal hormone therapy. So you see Congress trying to get in the act here. Again, all women senators right now trying to convince their male colleagues. As I noted, a lot of comments on our Instagram account over the weekend when we posted the clip. One of you noting you're an endocrinologist, noting, as endocrinologists, we are ready to do the work needed. We are hormone doctors. We need more funding for research, 3 exclamation points, and this is the time to do it. All right, let's get to today's speed read, starting with this from the Associated Press. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday that his government has voted unanimously to shut down the local offices of Al Jazeera, the Qatari government-owned broadcast network. It comes as ceasefire negotiations with Hamas continue, incidentally mediated by the Qatari government. The Israeli Prime Minister saying that Al Jazeera reporters have harmed Israeli security and incited violence against soldiers. The government has already called Al Jazeera a Hamas mouthpiece, but it is the first time in Israel's history that it has actually blocked a specific news outlet. The decision will go into effect in the coming weeks. It will likely include the closing of the channel's offices in Israel, the potential confiscation of their broadcast equipment, as well as preventing the broadcast of the channels and their website within the country. Now, Al Jazeera has rejected accusations that it harms Israel's security as, quote, dangerous and a ridiculous lie, and that puts its journalists actually at risk here. It says it will pursue legal steps in Israel, in Israeli courts, to try to block this. Now, we should note the Israelis have had a long and rocky relationship with Al Jazeera, often accusing it of bias. Relations took a major downturn 2 years ago when an Al Jazeera correspondent, Shireen Abu Akleh, was killed during an Israeli military raid in the West Bank. Now, while Al Jazeera's English operation often resembles programming found on networks like CNN and the BBC, its Arabic language arm often publishes verbatim video statements from Hamas and includes more provocative programming that is sometimes seen as supportive of various militant groups. Several governments in the region have already taken issue with Al Jazeera's coverage. It has been closed or blocked at various times from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Jordan, and Egypt, all at times accusing the Qatari-owned channel of trying to instigate riots or instability in their countries. Many accusing them of taking, again, extreme positions, especially that Arabic channel, though right now they've all been re-allowed in those countries after various fights over the last couple decades. This all comes as the head of the CIA, the American CIA, is traveling from Qatar to Egypt today for an emergency meeting as they try to keep negotiations going going right now between Hamas and Israel. They appear to, over the weekend, to have fallen apart. Right now, the goal from the Egyptians, the Qataris, the Americans is to exert what they call maximum pressure on Israel and Hamas to keep negotiating, even though the talks here appear to be near collapse. Hamas reiterated over the weekend its demand for a complete end to the war before they agree to any ceasefire. The Israelis right now have been saying, we want some hostages released, and we will agree to a longer-term ceasefire that could last several weeks or several months. But Hamas adamant that they want a complete end to the war before they give up a single hostage. It's believed that about 130 hostages continue to remain in Hamas custody, and up to 100 of them are still alive, and that includes 5 Americans who continue to be held more than 200 days into the war now. Again, the Israelis willing to do a pause in fighting, release Palestinian prisoners, more humanitarian aid, Hamas demanding complete end to the war and the complete removal of all Israeli troops, Israel saying they will not do that because that'll allow Hamas to continue to be the governing authority in Gaza, and one of the goals of their war, and one of the goals of Israel's war, was to eliminate the Hamas government over Gaza. The Israelis saying if these talks fall apart, they will likely invade the southern city of Rafah. That's where the remaining heart of Hamas forces lie. It's also where about 1.5 million displaced Palestinians live, and that's why you've seen a lot of Western countries, including the U.S., push back on the Israeli invasion plan, saying, what are you going to do with all these displaced civilians? We're very worried about the casualties that could come of a Rafah invasion. The Israelis trying to create some leverage here for themselves as they push back and say, we're going to invade Rafah no matter what, especially if these talks fall apart. And it comes as there was some violence over the weekend, Hamas launching a number of projectiles at a border crossing where humanitarian aid comes through. They ended up killing 3 Israeli soldiers, injuring several others, forcing Israel to close that border crossing, again, where humanitarian aid was coming, after the Hamas military wing claimed responsibility for the attack. All right, next up here from Reuters, just across the border in Mexico. That's where thieves apparently killed 2 Australians and 1 American on a surfing trip to Mexico, authorities said on Sunday. State prosecutors in Baja California, far western Mexico, said that they believe that the killings took place because the bandits wanted to steal the truck of these surfers. They wanted the tires, and it led to a dispute with the surfers. The men, identified by family members as brothers Jake and Callum Robinson from Australia and American Jack Carter Road, went missing last Saturday. They did not show up at their planned accommodations over the weekend. And they now have found the remains. Thieves apparently dumped them into a remote well about 50 feet deep. The 3 men were on a camping and surfing trip along a stretch of coast south of the city of Ensenada, down there in Baja California. They were posting a whole bunch of photos on social media of waves and isolated beaches before they went missing last weekend. Again, the theory here is that the killers drove by, saw the foreigners' pickup truck, and wanted to either steal the truck or steal parts of the truck. That's when the 2 Australians and the American came up. They resisted, and they were killed. Prosecutors in Baja California, down there in Mexico, said they have been questioning a number of people in the case. They were caught with methamphetamines, and several are being held right now on drug charges and are seen as suspects in the case. Apparently, one of the men's girlfriends had meth and had one of the surfers' cell phones on her. We should note that Baja California, very large. It's one of Mexico's most violent states, depending on what part of it that you're in, but also it has some of the most idyllic beaches and some of the stable parts, and also some stable, safe places. Ensenada is located about 90 minutes south of the U.S.-Mexico border. It has long attracted tourists from California. Mexican authorities are trying to reassure tourists that it is safe to come to Baja California, and this was an isolated incident. All right, next up here from CNN, an update on a few of the campus protests that we've been watching. Out there in LA at USC over the weekend, police cleared a pro-Palestinian encampment without making any arrests on Sunday. It's the second time now that they've effectively dismantled the tent encampments, though they tend to then come back and rebuild the encampments. Protesters left the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian encampment early Sunday after they were surrounded by police and told they would be arrested if they didn't go. So in this case, the protesters listening to authorities, deciding they would rather leave than be arrested. It comes just days after there were numerous arrests over at UCLA nearby there Nearby USC, mass arrests took place, declared the protesters at USC deciding they didn't want to repeat what took place at UCLA. USC looking ahead to their commencement festivities and is looking to clear out these encampments ahead of it. All right, across the country, over at UVA, the University of Virginia, at Charlottesville, over the weekend, police cleared out protesters, taking down a number of tents on campus on Saturday. Police officers in riot gear approached the protesters, grabbing away umbrellas they were using to try to defend themselves. About 25 people were arrested for trespassing. In Chicago over the weekend, at the Art Institute of Chicago, police say they arrested 68 people, including some who were affiliated with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, as well as a number of outsiders. A spokesperson said the protesters had shoved a security officer, stole keys to the museum, blocked emergency exits, and barricaded gates, leading them to call Chicago PD to conduct the arrests. Popping over now to the Ann Arbor, Michigan, University of Michigan, where they have about a 200-person tent encampment. That remains, though the pro-Palestinian protesters took a moment to interrupt several of the commencement ceremonies over the weekend, including the university's main commencement ceremony in the main stadium there. No one was arrested after the brief interruption. Eventually, security authorities pushing the protesters back who were disrupting the ceremony. All right, continuing to bop around here at the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, pro-Palestinian protesters gathered on Thursday, but the event turned quickly hostile as they were outnumbered, actually, at Ole Miss by counter-protesters. So the protest quickly ended, though the university is now investigating a video from the event. That's where a black female graduate student who was part of the pro-Palestinian protesters was approached by two young men from the counter group, one of the men appearing to imitate an ape at the woman. A university chancellor saying they're investigating this, especially given the hostility and the racist overtones of the actions. Finally, in the nation's capital at GW, my alma mater, a few blocks from the White House, a tent encampment is now in its second week. That's where several dozen students refuse to leave the university yard, the quad there at GW. They have now lowered university flags. They have raised Palestinian flags on campus. They've renamed the quad Martyr Square, Shaheed Square at GW. They also held a mock trial on Friday where they impersonated university officials, found them guilty of assisting genocide, with some students then chanting guillotine, guillotine. The university at Now, GW officials put out the latest statement on Sunday saying they're not equipped to clear this protest, that they have made multiple requests from D.C. police to clear it. But D.C. police saying bad optics for them, and they haven't seen any violence yet. So despite some of the more violent rhetoric, because they haven't seen violence, D.C. police deciding we're not going to clear the protest. We've seen similar actions up in Baltimore, where Johns Hopkins University made a request of Baltimore police to clear their tent encampment. Baltimore PD also not clearing the tent encampment up there in Baltimore. So back at GW, the tent encampment continues. The university has responded by unfurling a giant American flag over a building behind the protesters. The protesters responding with boos and now projecting a light with Joe Biden's picture and the phrase "Genocide Joe." So that's the situation we continue to watch in the nation's capital, along with all these other protests around the country. All right, from the Washington Post now, a story many of you commented on our Instagram account about over the weekend. Florida has now become the first state to say no to lab-grown meat. Governor Ron DeSantis signing a bill last week banning cultivated meat from being sold in Florida. It's in response to a major lobbying push by the cattle industry, and other states may soon follow. DeSantis saying last week, Florida is fighting back against the, quote, global elite's plan to force the world to eat meat grown in petri dishes. Now, what he's talking about here is cell-cultivated meat grown in a lab from animal cells. It's an edible meat substitute. Scientists have developed alternative chicken, fish, beef, all can be produced here. It was first developed back in the Netherlands back in 2013. Now more than 100 companies are working on related products. DeSantis says that the lab-grown meat will threaten the state's agriculture industry, specifically ranching. Beef cattle generate nearly $1 billion a year in Florida. Florida ranks 9th in the U.S. when it comes to beef cattle production, so they've been lobbying hard right now for bans on lab-grown meat. One of the producers, the company is called Upside Foods, said the ban could put the resilience of Florida's supply chain at risk by hindering the state's ability to address the projected doubling of global protein demand by 2050. What they're saying is that in about 25 years, humans will need double the amount of protein that we need today, and lab-grown meat will be key to that. The concern being that if the U.S. does not continue to innovate when it comes to lab-grown meat, the Chinese are right now, and that'll allow the Chinese to effectively control that industry. Proponents of this also say it's a way to fight climate change. The amount of methane that's produced by beef cattle is a significant percentage of the CO2 that goes into the atmosphere. Food security is also key as we see floods and droughts, etc. So there is a big group that is behind lab-grown meat. At the same time, though, the U.S. meat industry is nearly a $300 billion industry annually, and traditional meat producers have been trying to block the idea of lab-grown meat from a variety of places, including school lunches. But right now, there is no lab-grown meat available at U.S. supermarkets. This is sort of getting ahead of the game here. Upside Foods, the company I mentioned, and one other have earned USDA approval for their cultivated chicken to sell them to restaurants initially. Last year, Jose Andres had a restaurant in D.C. that debuted lab-grown meat. Also, another Michelin-starred restaurant in San Francisco debuted lab-grown meat. Both restaurants have stopped serving it for now. And as far as legislation is concerned, obviously Florida now has a ban. A few other states are considering similar measures. That includes Alabama, Arizona, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. All right, from USA Today now, tick season is ramping up, and the CDC is saying people need to take precautions before venturing outside. Tick season typically lasts between April and September. Of the 700 species of ticks in the world, the U.S. is home to about 50 of them, nearly 10%. Now, while only a few of the 50 can actually transmit disease to people, those species are the ones growing in numbers and in reach. The latest numbers we have are from 2022. That's when it's estimated that tick-borne diseases in the U.S. rose to about 63,000 cases, 3/4 of those Lyme disease. Now, those cases have doubled over the last 10 years. Blame right now partially on climate change. It's led to warmer weather, rainier weather, and that has meant that ticks have expanded to new regions, putting more people in contact with ticks and their illness-causing bacteria. As I mentioned, ticks are most closely associated with Lyme disease. There's actually only a couple of the ticks that can give you Lyme disease. Cases are mainly reported in the upper Midwest, the Northeast, and the mid-Atlantic states, though, again, it continues to spread based on a changing climate. Now, the chances of contracting Lyme disease from a tick bite is between 1% and 3%. Now, I should note, context here, that even if you get bitten by a tick, the chances of contracting Lyme disease from a tick bite is between 1% and 3%. For a disease to be transmitted, a tick must actually remain connected to you from between 24 to 36 hours. So the CDC warning here that anytime you're outside to check your body, and the way the ticks work is they climb up from the ground to the top of your body. So check your lower body parts first, toes, ankles, legs. Then they warn between your legs, your crotch region is the next area to check. And then work your way up behind the ears in your hair. Again, the way the ticks kind of move up your body there. And then also, as you go inside, check your clothes for ticks as well. Ticks can be as small as a poppy seed. All right, finally here, a bit of music news from Rolling Stone magazine. Madonna stepped out on a massive stage constructed on Rio de Janeiro's Copacabana Beach Saturday night, greeted by the largest live crowd of her entire career and potentially breaking a world record here. The free show was announced back in March. It was the grand finale to her latest world tour, which has delivered 80 performances around the world over the last 5 months. Now, there was no ticket data here because it was a free concert on Copacabana Beach, but the tourism department of Rio de Janeiro estimated 1.6 million people flooding a 2.5-mile stretch of sand Saturday night. So it is believed those 1.6 million people made it the largest concert in history. That beats a previous concert at Copacabana Beach about 18 years ago. The Rolling Stones on the beach in 2006 had 1.5 million attendees. So Madonna breaking new records here, as, by the way, today marks the 26th birthday for her Ray of Light album. All right, and we end here, as always, with On This Day in History. We start in 1937. The Hindenburg, the hydrogen-filled German airship, crashed while attempting to dock in New Jersey on this day in 1937. 35 of the 97 people on board were killed, along with a crewman on the ground. At the time, they believed that these hydrogen-filled Zeppelins were going to be the future of air travel. All right, fast forward to the 90s. On this date in 1998, Steve Jobs introduced Apple's first iMac. Many of us went to college with them there in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was a personal computer that became a hugely successful part of Apple's revival. Remember, before 98, Apple was struggling there until the return of Steve Jobs, the simplification of what was going on in Apple, and then you saw the iMac, iPod, and iPhone there in just a matter of a few years. All right, on this date in 2018, Ashley Judd sued movie producer Harvey Weinstein over allegations of sexual harassment and defamation. She was the first actor to come forward with allegations against Harvey Weinstein. We told you last week that his conviction was recently overturned. Judd telling CBS, "Male sexual violence is such a thief. First they rape us, then they steal our time," as she was asked about her reaction to the overturning of the conviction. All right, we end here with a bit of TV and music history. On this day 20 years ago, last episode of Friends aired on NBC. More than 52 million people watched the final episode of Friends. Of course, Ross and Rachel getting back together, sort of what we wanted to see. That's what many people, of course, wanted to see. At 52 million viewers, it is the 5th most watched TV series finale of all time. Friends, number 5. Seinfeld, number 4. Fugitive, from back in the 60s, number 3. Cheers at number 2, and the series finale of MASH, still the most watched series finale of all time. On this day 28 years ago, the Backstreet Boys releasing their first album, their self-titled debut album, Backstreet Boys. And on this day the following year, the Hanson brothers releasing their debut album, Middle of Nowhere. A number of you may have listened to us in the last couple of weeks as we did the history of Bop and what it means on a recent episode. All right, I want to thank all of you for listening to the Mo News Daily Podcast. A heads up to all of you, there's a special new edition of Mo News The Interview out today. In honor of International Day of the Midwife, which was yesterday, we've put out a special episode. My wife Alex and I interviewing the midwife who delivered our baby. We actually conducted the interview back in September, just a few days before Olivia arrived. As we talk about maternal health and all the important issues around that, I think you will get a lot out of that episode, talking about midwifery, the history of midwives, why they continue to be much more popular outside the U.S. than inside the U.S., and the significant differences between them and OBGYN. So again, check that out over at the Mo News Interview Podcast. Make sure you're following that show. A wide variety of topics and guests that we cover over there at Mo News The Interview. All right, thanks to all of you for listening. Jill, safe travels, and look forward to having you back on the pod tomorrow.